Welcome to an Introduction to Economics, brought to you by Parkbench Tutors and narrated by David Hopcroft. For further information about Parkbench Tutors, please visit parkbenchtutors.com. In this podcast, we shall continue our discussion about the effects of trade policies. In particular, we shall be looking at trade after a tariff is removed as a result of a customs union, and how the European Union became a free trade area for its members. There are a number of ways in which countries may come together for economic integration. In a free trade area, the barriers are lifted between the members, and each country can still then impose barriers on non-members. In a custom union, there is a greater degree of integration. The member countries still have a tariff-free agreement between members, but they now have a common agreement on external tariffs for non-member countries. A further development of this is often referred to as the common market. This builds on the custom union idea, but also allows the free movement of labour and capital between the member countries. Yet another development is the formation of an economic union, where there is movement towards use of a common currency. This podcast is going to consider a customs union. The idea is that trade creation should occur when production is shifted from a higher cost source to a lower cost source within the union. We also consider the idea that trade diversion can occur if production is shifted from a low cost source which is outside the customs union to a high cost source which is inside the customs union. The starting point here is for two countries, A and B, where there is a tariff in place prior to the creation of a customs union. A quantity Q1 of good is supplied at price P1. The supply of good from country B with the tariff is shown. P2 represents the price that would be charged without the tariff. The quantity Q2 is the amount of the good that is produced by the country A. SDSD is the domestic supply curve for country A, and DDDD is the domestic demand curve for country A. Before the custom union takes place, the consumer surplus is represented by the triangle P1HJ. This is the area between the supply curve with the tariff and the demand curve. Consumer surplus is the gap between the total utility that society derives from a good and the actual market value of a good. After the customs union is formed, the tariff is removed and the price now falls to P2. The quantity of good consumed rises to Q3, an increase of Q3 minus Q1. The quantity of the good produced by domestic supply falls from Q2 to Q4, a loss of Q2 minus Q4. The amount of goods supplied by country B is represented by Q3 minus Q4. The consumer surplus has increased from the area of the triangle P1HJ to a larger triangle whose area is P2HC. Let us now look at what the increase in area actually represents. The area that we are considering is represented by P2CJP1 and is composed of a number of smaller areas. We need to consider each of these smaller areas in turn. The benefit to the consumer is the transfer of producer surplus and is represented by the shape P1, P2, EG. The red area here, the rectangle FEJD, represents the loss of revenue from tariff that would have gone to the government. The two smaller triangles, GEF and DJC, represent a net addition to welfare. This situation then increases welfare. Now we shall consider what happens if there is trade creation and trade diversion. In this map we have added an additional curve. SW represents the supply from the rest of the world, in other words, the supply from outside the customs union. Remember that SB is the supply curve from inside the union, from country B, and SD is the domestic supply curve. Without a tariff, the supply SW from the rest of the world was at price P3. Imposing the tariff puts the price at P1. Remember too, we are considering the difference after the union. The supply curves we are interested in are SDSD, SB, and SW plus the tariff. As before, we can identify the areas that represent an addition to welfare as the two small triangles, FDE and CKL. We can also identify the tariff that was available as revenue to the government prior to the union. The tariff revenue can be identified as the area GDKH. The area below the tariff area represents the original cost of producing imports, Q2, GHQ1. After the union, the cost of producing has increased to the area Q2ECQ1. The extra cost of producing the imports is the area GECH, which represents the misallocation cost of trade diversion. What we are looking at is the extra cost of producing the good in a country inside the union instead of from the rest of the world. This leaves us with a fairly simple calculation. The two triangles represent additions to welfare. The rectangle represents resource misallocation, which is a cost. For there to be a benefit in net welfare, the area of the two triangles must exceed the area of the rectangle. Finally, we are going to take a brief look at the European Economic Community, the EEC. This began as 6 countries joining together to form the European Coal and Steel Community. There were 6 original members: France, Italy, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. The community was formed in 1952 to provide a stronger and united area in Europe. There was acceptance that major trading countries in the post-war period were going to be the USA and the Soviet Union. And then that Europe needed to come together as a trading area. The United Kingdom remained outside the community, partly because it had strong ties to trade with the Commonwealth countries. The 6 countries went a step further in 1957 with the Treaty of Rome, forming the European Economic Community. Realizing that free trade within Europe was becoming more important, the United Kingdom then participated in the formation of a European Free Trade Association, EFTA, whose arrangements were limited to industrial goods and did not cover agricultural produce. However, by 1972, the UK, Denmark and Ireland had all applied successfully to join the EEC. The EEC has been growing ever since, and is still considering applications from countries wishing to join. Monthly trade for the UK with the other European Union members varies, and at times shows more goods being imported from those countries than are exported to them. Remember that this map relates only to goods. The figures over the past decade show that there has been a trade deficit both with EEC countries and non-EEC countries. The United Kingdom makes one of the larger contributions to the finances of the community. Under the rebate system, it is actually around the third largest contributor. The largest contributions are made by Germany and France. Concern arises within the UK because the costs of the EEC are largely in the form of subsidies, and that most of these are handed out to countries under the Common Agricultural Policy. At one time, much of this money went to purchasing surplus agricultural produce, and there was great concern about the amounts of surplus butter, wine, and other products being purchased centrally. There were more concerns when these were subsequently sold off at an even lower price to other countries outside the EEC. Controversy still arises over the use of policies that produce surplus products. This article relates to a recent purchase in 2009 of surplus dairy products. The move came in order to prevent a decline in the dairy industry that might have produced long-term problems. This ends our second podcast on trade policies, brought to you by Parkbench Tutors and narrated by David Hopcroft. Thank you for watching and for listening. We wish you success in your studies. For more information about Parkbench Tutors, please visit parkbenchtutors.com.